Marcus Rivera stepped through the shimmering portal onto what was supposed to be the deadliest campus in the known galaxy. He adjusted his backpack, took a deep breath of the supposedly toxic atmosphere, and grinned. The warning signs plastered across the orientation packet had made the Galactic Academy sound like a death trap. Instead, it felt like a mild spring day in Chicago. Containment human exposure. Medical team to Arrival Bay. The automated alert system blared as sensor arrays detected his presence outside the designated safe zone. Marcus watched with amusement as environmental shields slammed into place and emergency response teams in fully sealed hazard suits came charging toward him. "I'm fine, really," he called out, waving at the approaching medics. "The air's actually pretty nice here. Reminds me of home." Dr. Nexel, a towering crystalline being who served as the Academy's xenobiology professor, stepped forward. Their faceted surface reflected Marcus's image in a kaleidoscope of worried expressions. "Impossible," they chimed, crystalline resonances conveying deep concern. "The atmospheric composition here is classified as Grade X corrosive. No carbon-based life form should be able to survive direct exposure." Marcus shrugged. "Maybe your sensors need recalibrating. I mean, this is way cleaner than ley smog." The emergency response team huddled around their scanning equipment, chittering in disbelief. Marcus took the opportunity to observe his fellow students watching from behind the safety barriers. There were floating gas clouds, crystalline beings like Dr. Nexel, and what appeared to be sentient plasma contained in force fields. No other humans in sight. "Fascinating," Dr. Nexel finally announced. "It appears the human is not only surviving, but showing no signs of cellular degradation. Perhaps we should proceed with orientation while we analyze this anomaly." The other students kept their distance as Marcus was led toward the academy proper. He noticed a gelatinous being named Blob, at least that's what the translator rendered, actively trying to stay on the opposite side of the group. "Today's practical exercise," Dr. Nexel announced once they reached the training grounds, "will test your species' natural defensive capabilities. Please approach the testing station when called." Marcus watched as his classmates demonstrated various impressive abilities. Blob could absorb and neutralize energy weapons. A crystalline student could withstand extreme pressure. The plasma being could temporarily merge with and control simple machines. "Human Rivera," Dr. Nexel called. "Please approach with caution. The testing chamber is calibrated for." Marcus was already jogging toward the station. "No worries, Prof. What's the challenge?" "We'll start with basic environmental hazards. Please indicate any discomfort immediately." The chamber hummed to life. Marcus felt a slight temperature drop. "Is it starting?" "We are currently at -100 degrees Celsius," Dr. Nexel reported with concern. "Oh, chilly. Like winter in Minnesota. Want to try something actually cold?" The chamber's warning lights began flashing as Dr. Nexel increased the intensity. Marcus started doing jumping jacks to stay warm while his classmates watched in horror. "Remarkable," Dr. Nexel noted. "Let's try the other extreme." The chamber filled with steam. Marcus wiped his brow. "Like a nice sauna. We had one of these back home." "The chamber is at 300 degrees Celsius," Dr. Nexel announced. "Far beyond survivable limits for carbon-based life." "Really? Huh. No wonder people say humans are weird." The testing continued with increasing desperation as Dr. Nexel tried to find Marcus's limits. "Radiation levels that would sterilize planets. Bit tingly. Crushing pressure. Good for my back, actually. Exposure to acids. Spicy." By the end of the session, the testing chamber was smoking slightly, and Dr. Nexel's crystalline form had developed several stress fractures. "I believe," they announced to the stunned class, "we will need to significantly revise our understanding of human physiological capabilities, and possibly reinforce our testing equipment." Marcus gathered his slightly singed backpack. "Sorry about the machine. Professor back home, we just call this Tuesday. So when do real classes start?" As the students filed out, Dr. Nexel began composing an urgent message to the Academy Board. Either their classification of Earth as a deaf world was severely underestimated, or they had accidentally admitted something far more interesting than a simple Deathworlder to their program. What they didn't know was that Marcus was considered quite normal by human standards. In fact, he'd barely qualified for the exchange program. The real question was, what would happen when the truly exceptional human students arrived? Today's exercise, Dr. Nexel announced, their crystalline form gleaming under the artificial lights, will test your tactical response capabilities in extreme scenarios. The class stood before a massive holographic chamber that took up most of the Academy's simulation wing. Marcus noticed several technicians making last-minute adjustments to the system's safety protocols, occasionally glancing nervously in his direction. After yesterday's unexpected results, Dr. Nexel continued, we've modified the simulation parameters to account for human baseline capabilities. Blob wobbled excitedly. Will we be using the Omega-class combat scenarios? Their translucent form rippled with anticipation. Indeed, though I must stress that these simulations are designed to be impossibly difficult. The goal is not to win, but to survive as long as possible while demonstrating proper tactical thinking. Marcus raised his hand. So it's like a roguelite game. Sweet. A what? Dr. Nexel's crystalline surfaces flickered in confusion. You know, hardcore games where you're supposed to die a lot and learn from your mistakes. We have tons of those on Earth. Dark Souls, Hades, Returnal. The other students stared at him blankly, while Dr. Nexel made a note in their datapad. Fascinating. Humans intentionally create recreational activities designed to cause repeated failure. Well, yeah, how else do you get good at stuff? Marcus shrugged. Plus it's fun. Fun, Dr. Nexel repeated slowly, adding another note. Very well. Blob, you'll go first. Remember, focus on survival rather than victory. The simulation chamber hummed to life as Blob entered. Holographic projectors created a nightmarish landscape filled with environmental hazards and combat drones. The class watched on external monitors as Blob demonstrated impressive defensive capabilities, lasting almost 3 minutes before being overwhelmed. Each student took their turn, employing their species' unique abilities to navigate the chaos. The plasma being Spark set a new class record at 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Finally, it was Marcus's turn. Standard survival parameters, Dr. Nexel announced. Beginning simulation in 3, 2, 1. Marcus found himself in what looked like an alien war zone. Acid rain fell from blood-red skies, while combat drones swarmed through the ruins of strange buildings. In the distance, something that looked suspiciously like a volcano was erupting. Oh man, he grinned. This is just like that game Apocalypse Survivor 3000. Before Dr. Nexel could ask what that meant, Marcus was moving. He dove behind a fallen column, just as energy blasts scorched the ground where he'd been standing. Instead of trying to fight the drones directly, he grabbed a piece of debris and threw it at a nearby acid rain collection pool. The caustic liquid splashed onto several drones, short-circuiting them. Interesting strategy, Dr. Nexel commented. Using environmental hazards to, wait, what is he doing now? Marcus had climbed onto one of the disabled drones and was removing its weapon system. Basic crafting mechanics. He called out cheerfully. You always strip equipment from fallen enemies. The simulation's difficulty automatically increased as Marcus survived past the 5-minute mark. The volcano erupted, sending waves of lava flowing through the ruins. Instead of retreating, Marcus used the terrain to his advantage, leading pursuit drones into dead ends where they were consumed by the molten rock. 7 minutes, Dr. Nexel announced, that a voice containing traces of awe. This shouldn't be possible. Nah, this is pretty standard, Marcus replied, now dual-wielding salvage drone weapons. Though the hit detection could use some work, bit glitchy on the corners. At the 10-minute mark, the simulation began throwing combinations of hazards that had never been tested. Acid tornadoes merged with lava flows, while electromagnetic pulses disabled equipment. Marcus treated it all like an elaborate Parker course, using physics exploits that shouldn't have been possible in the real world. Is he humming? One of the technicians asked in disbelief. Indeed, Marcus could be heard casually humming what sounded like background music while executing increasingly improbable maneuvers. Sorry, he called out after a particularly dramatic dive through an acid waterfall. Force of habit. Games always need a good soundtrack. At 15 minutes, the simulation computers began showing signs of stress. They had never been required to generate scenarios for this long, and Marcus's unconventional approaches were forcing them to create new parameters on the fly. We should probably stop before we break another piece of equipment, Dr. Nexel suggested. Oh, just when I was getting to the good part, Marcus complained as the simulation faded. I hadn't even reached the first boss fight. The class stared at him in stunned silence. Even Dr. Nexel's crystalline form seemed to be processing what they'd witnessed. Mr. Rivera, they finally said, are you suggesting that humans regularly engage in recreational activities but simulate scenarios worse than our most advanced combat training programs? Well, yeah. How else would we relax after a long day? Dr. Nexel's next report to the Academy Board was considerably longer than the first. Humans, it seemed, didn't just survive Deathworld conditions. They had turned adapting to impossible scenarios into a form of entertainment. The implications were both fascinating and mildly terrifying. As the class filed out, Marcus could be heard asking if the simulation could be modified to include proper boss battles and maybe some power-ups. The technicians immediately filed for hazard pay. The Academy's chemical laboratory was designed to handle the most dangerous substances in known space. Triple-reinforced containment fields, quantum-locked storage units, and emergency vaporization protocols ensured that nothing dangerous could escape. At least, that was the theory. Today, Dr. Nexel announced, their crystalline form carefully modulated to project calm authority, we will study xenotoxicology and chemical defense mechanisms. Each student will analyze samples to determine their species' resistance to various compounds. Marcus stood at his workstation, already wearing the required protective gear, though he'd argued it seemed excessive. Around him, his classmates were taking extraordinary precautions with their sample containers. Please note, Dr. Nexel continued, these substances are classified as universal toxins. They are theoretically lethal to all known forms of life. Handle with extreme. Mr. Rivera, what are you doing? Marcus looked up from where he was casually sniffing one of the sample tubes. Just checking something. This smells like my grandma's hot sauce. The entire class recoiled in horror. Blob nearly lost cohesion entirely. Dr. Nexel's surface crackled with stress patterns. That, they said with careful precision, is Anafrix 9, a compound so caustic it can dissolve quantum-stabilized metals. Please do not. Oh, no wonder it seemed familiar. Marcus grinned. We use this stuff as a marinade back home. Well, a diluted version, great for breaking down tough proteins. Dr. Nexel made another note in their increasingly crowded datapad. Humans consume substances similar to Xenofrix 9, voluntarily. Sure, there's this place in Bangkok that makes this amazing curry. They have you sign a waiver before they serve it. Marcus peered at another sample. Hey, this one looks like energy drinks from back home. Before anyone could stop him, Marcus had carefully mixed several drops of different samples together in a clean beaker. The resulting liquid glowed with an ominous purple light. Fascinating reaction, he muttered. The molecular restructuring is similar to what happens when you mix energy drinks with citrus juice, though this seems more stable. The laboratory sensors suddenly went haywire. Warning lights flashed as the detection systems tried to classify the new compound Marcus had inadvertently created. Unknown substances, DHTHTED. Composition analysis failed. Emergency protocols engaged. Mr. Rivera, Dr. Nexel said with remarkable composure given the circumstances, you have somehow created an entirely new chemical compound by mixing some of the deadliest substances known to science. And you did it while comparing them to beverages. Well, technically energy drinks aren't really beverages in the traditional sense. They're more like liquid stimulants with flavoring. Marcus held the glowing mixture up to the light. Though this stuff looks way cooler, think we could patent it. The emergency containment fields snapped into place as security drones swarmed into the lab. To everyone's surprise, their scans indicated that Marcus's creation was not only stable but potentially useful. Initial analysis suggests, one drone reported, that the compound exhibits properties consistent with theoretical superconductors, but at room temperature. Dr. Nexel's crystalline form vibrated with a mixture of academic excitement and administrative dread. You accidentally created room-temperature superconductors by mixing deadly toxins based on their similarity to human beverages. Is that good? Marcus asked, still studying his creation. Because I was just trying to recreate this awesome drink I had at a rave once. Though this probably wouldn't taste as good. Mr. Rivera, Dr. Nexel said slowly, you may have just revolutionized several fields of science through what I can only describe as reckless enthusiasm and a concerning familiarity with dangerous substances. The lab was quickly evacuated as research teams moved in to study Marcus's creation. As they left, students could hear him asking if anyone wanted to grab lunch at the cafeteria. I heard they're serving something called ultra-acidic protein cubes today, he said cheerfully. Sounds spicy. The entire class decided to skip lunch. Dr. Nexel's third report to the Academy Board required additional data storage. It began with the line, urgent consideration needed. Humans may not understand the concept of lethal in any meaningful way. Later that day, the cafeteria staff watched in amazement as Marcus enthusiastically consumed dishes designed for silicon-based life forms, comparing them to various Earth cuisines and suggesting improvements to the recipes. The Academy's definition of universal toxin was quietly updated to include the footnote, results may vary when applied to human subjects. The Academy's annual physical assessment day arrived with its usual mix of dread and anticipation. The massive testing arena, filled with equipment designed to measure everything from quantum reflexes to gravitational manipulation abilities, hummed with nervous energy. Remember, Dr. Nexel addressed the class, their crystalline forms specially reinforced for the day's activities. These tests are calibrated to measure the absolute limits of your species' capabilities. There is no shame in reaching your biological maximums. Marcus stood among his classmates, bouncing slightly on his toes. After the previous week's chemistry incident, the Academy had tripled their insurance coverage and installed new emergency protocols specifically labeled human contingencies. First test, gravitational resistance, Dr. Nexel announced. Please enter the chamber one at a time. The students watched as Spark, the plasma being, demonstrated impressive resistance up to 15 times standard gravity. Blob managed to withstand 20 Gs by dispersing their mass across a wider area. Each species showed remarkable adaptations to extreme conditions. Then came Marcus's turn. Beginning at standard gravity, the testing computer announced, increasing by increments of 0.5 G. Marcus stood in the chamber, looking almost bored. Just let me know when it starts getting heavy. The gravity increased steadily. At 10 Gs, Marcus was still standing normally. At 20, he started doing jumping jacks. Is something wrong with the machine? Dr. Nexel asked the technicians. Negative. The human is actually performing calisthenics under forces that should be crushing him. At 30 Gs, Marcus switched to push-ups. This is great, he called out. Way better than the gym back home, though the resistance could be higher. The machine's warning lights began flashing at 40 Gs, not because of any danger to Marcus, but because the gravitational generators were approaching their limits. Mr. Rivera, Dr. Nexel interrupted. Are you suggesting that humans regularly exercise under extreme gravitational conditions? Well, not this extreme usually, but weighted workouts are pretty standard, though this would make a great CrossFit session. The next test involved reaction speeds. Marcus's responses weren't particularly impressive until Dr. Nexel noticed something odd. "Mr. Rivera, why are you using only your right hand?" "Oh, sorry, force of habit from gaming. Want me to try with both hands?" His scores immediately doubled, approaching theoretical limits for neural transmission speeds. The testing computer began displaying error messages. "Fascinating," Dr. Nexel noted. "Humans developed faster reaction times through recreational electronic stimulation. Pretty much. You should see pro gamers. They're way faster than me." The strength testing station actually broke when Marcus decided to warm up by doing one-armed pull-ups. The flexibility assessment had to be recalibrated after he demonstrated what he called basic yoga poses. But it was the endurance test that finally caused Dr. Nexel to completely reassess their understanding of human capabilities. "Mr. Rivera," they said after 2 hours of continuous high-intensity exercise, "the test was complete 45 minutes ago." "Really? But I'm just getting warmed up. Humans are persistence predators, you know. We can keep going for hours." The entire class watched in fascination as Marcus explained the concept of runner's high and how humans historically hunted by simply following prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. "You mean," Blob wobbled nervously, "humans can pursue targets indefinitely?" "Well, not indefinitely. We need water breaks and snacks. Speaking of which, anyone want to grab lunch after this? All this testing is making me hungry." Dr. Nexel's report to the Academy Board that evening contained multiple exclamation points, which was particularly impressive given their crystalline method of communication. "Evidence suggests," they wrote, "that human physical capabilities may have been severely underestimated. Their endurance alone classifies them as pursuit predators of unprecedented efficiency. More concerning is their apparent inability to recognize these abilities as extraordinary." The report ended with a recommendation to re-evaluate all existing data on human physical limits, noting that previous studies may have been compromised by humans simply not taking the tests seriously enough to demonstrate their full capabilities. Meanwhile, in the Academy cafeteria, Marcus was enthusiastically consuming his third tray of high-density nutrient blocks, while explaining the concept of all-you-can-eat buffets to his increasingly horrified classmates. "And then," he said between bites, "they bring out more food when the trays get empty. It's awesome." The cafeteria staff began calculating how much it would cost to update their replication systems to handle human appetites. The Academy's emergency sirens blared to life during what had been a relatively normal afternoon of classes. Red warning lights pulsed through the corridors as the AI system announced, "Critical failure in Containment Sector 7. Quantum reactor cascade imminent. All personnel evacuate immediately." Dr. Nexel's crystalline form flickered with alarm patterns as they quickly assessed the situation. "Class dismissed. Please proceed to your designated emergency shelters following species-specific safety protocols." Marcus, who had been in the middle of what he called a power nap, sat up with sudden interest. "Quantum reactor cascade. That sounds serious." "Indeed," Dr. Nexel responded while hurriedly organizing evacuation routes. "The reaction could theoretically destroy half the station. The containment teams will handle. Mr. Rivera, where are you going?" Marcus was already jogging toward the source of the alarm. "To help. I've seen tons of movies about this kind of thing. Plus, I did a summer internship at a nuclear plant back home." "This is not a nuclear reactor," Dr. Nexel called after him. "It operates on fundamentally different principles that no human has ever," and he's gone. The corridors leading to Sector 7 were filled with fleeing personnel and emergency response robots. Marcus ran against the flow, occasionally stopping to help fallen individuals or redirect lost students. Temperature exceeding safety parameters, the AI announced. Containment breach in 15 minutes. Marcus reached the reactor control room to find chaos. Holographic warnings filled the air while technical staff argued over emergency procedures. "Excuse me," he called out, "but has anyone tried turning it off and on again?" The room fell silent as everyone turned to stare at the human who had somehow entered a restricted area during an evacuation. One technician started, "That's not how quantum reactors work. The entanglement cascade is already—" "Well, yeah," Marcus interrupted, studying the readouts with interest. "But sometimes the simplest solution works best. Like this." Before anyone could stop him, Marcus had vaulted over a safety barrier and reached for what looked like a main power coupling. "Wait," several voices shouted in unison. "That area is radiating enough quantum energy to destabilize molecular bonds." "Neat," Marcus replied, already pulling cables apart. "The tingling sensation reminds me of that energy drink I made in chemistry class." To everyone's amazement, the warning lights began to dim. The A's countdown stopped. "Quantum cascade reducing," it announced with what almost sounded like confusion. "Containment stabilizing. Warning. Unauthorized maintenance procedure detected." Dr. Nexel arrived just in time to see Marcus emerging from the reactor housing, his hair standing on end and his clothes slightly smoking. "That was awesome," he exclaimed. "Way more exciting than the nuclear plant internship. Though you might want to update your emergency procedures. The manual in there was pretty confusing." "You read the quantum physics manual, while the reactor was critical." "Well, skinned it. The diagrams were pretty clear though. Plus, it's basically just managing energy flow, right? Not that different from overclocking a gaming PC." The technical staff stared in stunned silence as Marcus casually explained how he'd recognized the cascade pattern from computer hardware failures and applied basic troubleshooting steps. "And you weren't concerned about the quantum radiation?" Dr. Nexel asked carefully. "Oh, was that what all the tingling was? Probably should have worn protective gear or something. Though I feel fine. Kind of energized, actually. Hey, is the cafeteria still open? Crisis management always makes me hungry." Dr. Nexel's emergency report to the Academy Board began with, "Urgent reclassification needed. Humans appear to possess natural quantum radiation resistance and an alarming tendency to apply simple solutions to complex problems. Success rate unexpectedly high." As the evacuation all clear sounded, students and staff returned to find Marcus in the cafeteria, enthusiastically describing the experience to his classmates while consuming what appeared to be 3 days' worth of rations. "And then I remembered this trick I learned from overclocking my computer's cooling system," he was saying, though obviously the scale was a bit different. "Anyone want to split a dessert? These quantum-stabilized protein cubes are actually pretty good." The Academy's emergency response protocols were updated to include a new section titled Human Intervention Guidelines. Warning: results may vary dramatically. The Academy Board's emergency session convened in their high-security chamber, surrounded by quantum encryption fields and reality stabilizers. Every member, representing different species and galactic regions, or expressions of deep concern, or their species equivalent. "We must address," the chair bang announced, its energy form flickering anxiously, "the human situation." Dr. Nexel projected their latest reports into the center of the chamber. "In the past month alone, student Marcus Rivera has survived lethal environmental conditions, revolutionized our understanding of chemical compounds, exceeded our physical testing equipment's capabilities, and prevented a quantum reactor disaster using methods that technically shouldn't work." And this morning, another board member added, he reportedly fixed the cafeteria's molecular reconstructor by, and I quote, "hitting it like an old TV set." The human's actions defy our understanding of universal constants, a quantum physicist declared, yet they consistently succeed. Dr. Nexel's crystalline form dimmed slightly. "There's more. After analyzing the data from Mr. Rivera's various incidents, we've made a disturbing discovery about Earth's classification." The holographic display shifted to show Earth's official designation, Deathworld, Class 13. As you can see, Dr. Nexel continued, Earth was classified as a death world due to its extreme conditions. What we failed to realize is that we were measuring it from our perspective, not the humans. Explain, the Chair-Beng demanded. Earth isn't just a death world. It's a crucible of evolution that has produced beings so adaptable that they view our most extreme conditions as mild inconveniences. Marcus Rivera isn't an exceptional human. By their standards, he's completely average. The chamber erupted in shocked discussions. Finally, the Chair-Beng restored order. Are you suggesting, it pulsed, that we accidentally admitted a species that has evolved beyond our measurement capabilities? Not exactly, Dr. Nexel replied. We admitted a species that turned survival into an art form. They don't just endure, they innovate, adapt, and somehow manage to enjoy the process. The display showed footage of Marcus in various situations, treating lethal chemicals like cooking ingredients, performing exercises under crushing gravity, and solving complex problems with seemingly illogical solutions. But the most remarkable aspect, Dr. Nexel concluded, is their perspective. Humans don't see themselves as exceptional. They view their abilities as completely normal and assume everyone else is just being overly cautious. This morning, they added, Mr. Rivera asked if we could spice up the survival training because it was, in his words, getting a bit predictable. The board sat in stunned silence, processing the implications. Finally, the Chair-Beng spoke. We must decide how to proceed. The human's presence has already led to several scientific breakthroughs, albeit through methods our safety protocols never anticipated. If I may, Dr. Nexel interjected, I have a suggestion. Instead of viewing humans as a problem to manage, we should recognize them as an opportunity. Their unique perspective and problem-solving abilities could revolutionize our understanding of the universe. And the risks are substantial, Dr. Nexel admitted. But consider, in 1 month, a single average human student has improved our chemical compounds, stress-tested our equipment, and prevented a disaster using methods we thought impossible. Imagine what we could learn if we actually started teaching them properly. The discussion continued for hours, but the outcome was inevitable. The Academy had inadvertently discovered something unprecedented, a species that treated survival as a recreational activity and viewed the impossible as merely a suggestion. The next day, Marcus was surprised to be called to the board chamber. He was even more surprised by their request. You want me to help design new training scenarios? He asked, grinning. Awesome. I've got some great ideas from video games we could adapt. Ever heard of Dark Souls? As Marcus enthusiastically described increasingly improbable training scenarios, Dr. Nexel added one final note to their report. Conclusion: humans don't just survive death worlds, they domesticate them. May the universe have mercy on whatever actually manages to frighten them. The Academy's curriculum was subsequently revised to include a new course, Human Perspective Studies, Understanding the Successfully Insane. Marcus' only complaint: the homework wasn't challenging enough.